Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this Sunday, reading through Exodus. I get excited about Exodus. I feel like it's a really good story, and I think that people who preach, when they say this one is a good story, they don't get enough credit because they're like, well, you have to say that because that's the Bible. Some of the stories of the Bible are rough to get through. This is a really good story. So I'm just really grateful that I get to bring this to you. For those of you who haven't met me yet, I'm Jonathan, and I'm on the pastoral leadership team here. And like I said, I am excited to be able to bring to you this story. And I was going back, looking at the stories that we have read through in Genesis, and I had totally forgotten the title that we gave to it. Beginnings Matter. So we were talking about Genesis, the story of Genesis, and the title of the topic was Beginnings Matter. And I think that we're going to see that even though we have shifted into the book of Exodus, that beginnings still matter. And that the way that God is bringing redemption to his people in Egypt, the way that it happens matters as well. So to catch you up, if you haven't been here for quite a while, we have a bunch of people living in Egypt as Hebrews. You're going to hear that word a lot. As I was preaching, or I was preparing for preaching, I was really convicted with this idea that the word that keeps being used is Hebrews. And a really big reason for that is when we think about what it means to be Jewish and to have that identity, a lot of that hasn't happened yet at all. The stories of salvation, the institution of the law, and all of that hasn't happened yet. And so the most common moniker given to the Hebrews before all this happens is Hebrews, because what they were being called out on is their language. Who are those people? The people that speak that language. They haven't really had this history that begins to define them, this history with God. So we have Joseph, a son of Jacob, goes and is sold into slavery to Egypt. When he arrives in Egypt, he becomes a blessing to the people of Egypt. Interpreting for them that this great famine was going to come. And this is actually, again, this is interesting. So he interprets the dream. It says that there will be a great famine. But then he makes a suggestion, which is kind of on him, to say, then I suggest that we start stockpiling food now. And so they do. And actually, this stockpiling of food for the years that are coming where there's not going to be much food, one is a blessing to the people of Egypt because then they weather the storm quite well, but also is blessing other nations around that are purchasing the grain that has been stored up. It also helps Pharaoh in particular. As the famine continues, and people are continuing to buy grain, and it's very expensive because they're the only ones that got grain. It changes the relationship that Pharaoh has with his people. Pharaoh begins to be more and more powerful. In fact, by the end of the famine, it said that the Egyptian people have basically sold everything and then sold themselves for grain. So the ultimate power that Pharaoh has everything to do with the fact that Joseph said, we need to stockpile grain, and it results in this kind of situation. It also results in the people of Israel, the Hebrews, coming and living in Egypt where there is food. They're sent to the land of Goshen, where they are just living, taking care of the sheep. And then it says that there became a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. And he begins to put taskmasters over them, enslave them, because he's afraid. But when they continue to grow stronger, Pharaoh enacts a law that all the Hebrew boys of a certain age must be killed. And Moses is saved from that fate by his mother, who builds for him an ark and leaves it in the Nile. He's also saved by an Egyptian princess and brought up in the palace, and he has been for these many years. As I was preparing this passage, the year 40 years kept coming up. 40 years. That's to be expected with Moses. Everything seems to happen 40 years for him. But I was struck particularly in that is my lifetime. So he has lived my lifetime in the land of Egypt before this story begins. And I think that that's really important for a couple reasons. One, that we know that Moses is not a young man. His personality is kind of set like an egg, so to speak. And this is who he is right now. But also, I just want to point out, he is a Hebrew boy, but he's lived almost his entire life as an Egyptian. He talks like an Egyptian. He dresses like an Egyptian. He is culturally Egyptian. People are wanting me to say he walks like an Egyptian. So fine, I will say that. But so culturally, even though he is Hebrew, culturally, he has been living as an Egyptian. And that's really important to this story in particular. But unlike popular depictions that we have of Moses, it does not appear that he didn't know what his parentage was. That's not something that we find in Scripture, that it was like a surprise. They're like, when he turned 40, they're like, by the way, you're Hebrew. What? He seems to have known that and yet been content to live as an Egyptian in the palace. Life is good as an Egyptian prince in the palace. But something has changed in Moses' life when he's reached this age, and that's where our story begins. So one day, this is chapter 2, verse 11. One day, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So the verb that we have here for looking, he went and looked on the burdens, is a word that's used when they would send leaders of countries out to assess the damage of, say, a natural disaster. So I want you to think about that. When he was looking, he wasn't just kind of seeing what's going on. What he was trying to do is assess what has been occurring and how his people have been treated. And he probably knows in some fashion. He probably has grown up in this culture. He knows what it is to be Hebrew. He knows what it is to be an Egyptian prince. And he knows in his head somewhere that his people are slaves. And yet, now that he's gone out to assess the damage, he is confronted with a very visceral example of what it means to be a Hebrew slave. And I feel like we're going to spend a little bit of time, a little extra time on this killing, because I think it really matters in terms of understanding what Moses has done and what kind of person Moses is at this time. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. And you're going to kind of want me to move on. I know that. Because nobody likes to talk about killing. But it matters. Beginnings matter. So first of all, the verb that Moses uses, I say this thinking that I'm saying it wrong. Moses is actually writing the book too. So I don't know. If you're picturing this, Moses is writing the book and he's like, oh man, there's a character, finally, I know. So Moses is using these words, he's choosing these words, but now he's choosing them about his story. And the word that he chooses, strike, the Egyptian that's striking the Hebrew slave, is the same word that is used about Moses. He also struck. It's the same word. Now, with that, it's not the same thing because there is a connotation that means he struck him dead and a connotation that he was striking him. So the attack that is happening on the Hebrew slave, it is dangerous, and yet Moses comes, gives him sort of a similar energy in the battle, and kills him. And that's all in the word there. So we hear that and we go, well, that's fine. Moses is just giving measure for measure, right? He's giving back what the Egyptian is giving the Hebrew. But I think that if you look at the surrounding context and the words that come after, it becomes clear that that's not the case. So first of all, the very first indication that I see that something is wrong with how Moses is responding is that it says that he looked this way and that. Okay? So he didn't just resist this taskmaster. He looked this way and that to see if he could get away with it. Okay? If you're ever thinking, can I get away with it? Whatever you're thinking, you're probably doing the wrong thing. No one ever thinks about, well, I really want to be caring to this person, but can I get away with it? Can I secretly somehow do this? Moses, just the very fact that he's looking this way and that is indicating that he is aware that what he's doing needs to be hidden. Then, it also says, then he buried the Egyptian in the sand. But no, it doesn't. We say that when we hear that. It actually says he hid him in the sand. So yes, he is burying the Egyptian, but more importantly, he's hiding the evidence. We also have to understand that Moses is a prince of Egypt. It's not just the title of the movie. Like literally in this passage, it talks about him being a prince of Egypt. And the Hebrew slaves that are going to come in a little while, which we haven't met yet, they are going to call him a prince. So they are aware of who he is. And given the fact that Pharaoh has unlimited control over this area in the world, it seems inconceivable that a prince of Egypt would show up and his commands to stop be ignored by the Egyptian man who is little more than a slave himself. The Egyptian people, they are not living as slaves in the sense that that malice and the degradation that the Hebrew people are, but they have literally no rights in this arena as well. So the idea that Moses couldn't have used lesser force and stopped what is going on seems inconceivable to me. And let's say, for instance, again, we're talking about unlimited power that the Pharaoh has. Let's say that Moses did kill this kind of unknown taskmaster out in the wilderness. He would not be the first nor the last person of power to be able to get away with it because of his power. He could have gone to his Pharaoh father and said, well, so this thing happened, and we could just sweep this under the rug. That's no problem. But Moses isn't acting like any of that is a reality for him. He looks this way and that, tries to get away with it. He hides the evidence. And add to that, again, a few things that we haven't seen yet. Then Moses is going to run. And he's going to run away for 40 years. Again, like I said, everything that happens to Moses seems to happen in 40-year increments. But even the amount of time that Moses is away from Egypt is indicating it's an exile that he is having, that he's experiencing. So based on all these facts, what I think that we've witnessed in the scriptures is a murder. And I think that it's important for us to sit with that for a second. Moses has been writing this story from Genesis until now, and he has been unflinching in his detail of both the faithful successes and the faithless failures of the patriarchs. This is a tell-all book. And Moses, when he gets to him, chooses, I'm still going to be writing a tell-all book. It's just now I'm in the story too. This tell-all from Moses is just as much a confession as it is a retelling of the facts of what happened. This is a failure of Moses. He murders and runs away. And I think when we hear that, our heroes, our great hero, we know who Moses is going to be. This is a bad beginning for Moses, at least as a man. When we read these stories and the heroes, and even the heroes behaving badly, we're not being called to live as they live necessarily, uncritically. We're being told the unvarnished truth about who they were, and we are being sort of asked as the reader to question them, to interrogate them. Was that right? Was that the only way to stop the beating? We are being asked to judge for ourselves and through what we know of God whether or not this was right action. And I think what we can see in this story is this was not right action. There is actually one other really interesting thing about this murder that happens, is that Stephen brings it up in his sermon in the Sanhedrin. And he gives it a really interesting twist that I want to bring out for you, because I think this is also going on in the story, but it's not directly stated. So this is in Acts 7:23 through 25. We're just going to look at that tiny bit that Stephen brings up. When he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them being wronged, he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down the Egyptian. He supposed that his brothers would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand, but they did not understand. So this adds one little twist to this story that is not really apparent, is that it is quite likely that Moses killing the taskmaster was a prelude to a kind of liberation. That it was not just Moses stopping a person doing wrong, but that he was attempting to start a revolution through his killing. Liberation by murder. And I think best way to explain this, the people of God are suffering at the hands of the Egyptians. the people of God, have been promised that they will be brought back, brought out. They have been promised that they would be freed, liberated. But they were not promised that it would happen this way that is so very against what God has spoken. We know, some people will say, oh, well, Moses didn't know because the Ten Commandments haven't happened yet. But all throughout history, murder has been one of the few things that everyone agrees on is wrong. In fact, if you're bragging that your religion teaches not to murder, you are bragging about nothing, okay? Murder is wrong, and we know it is as humans. The fact that God says the truth that we've always known about it is really him just telling the truth. Beginnings matter. I just want you to think about this for one extra moment. This was a liberation that Moses wanted to start. What would it mean for who the people of Israel would be if this is how it actually started? What kind of different people of God would we be if what God was doing when he sent Moses to the people of Israel was, all we got to do is start a riot, kill some people, and then you'll be free. So Moses thinks that he's gotten away with it. He leaves for the night and comes back, and he sees, in verse 13, when he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? That's that same word that the Egyptian was doing to the Hebrew. That same word that Moses did to the taskmaster. And I think that really indicates that this is not a little argument. This is a serious assault that is happening. The kind of thing that could lead to someone getting killed. Why do you strike your companion? He answered, who made you a prince or a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid, and he thought, surely the thing is known. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So he sees the people fighting, and maybe even fresh from his killing of the Egyptian, says to himself, like, yeah, I'm one of them. I am one of them. I'm going to go engage in this and stop the fighting because we got to get together. We really got to get this liberation thing started, right? But they, as the two Hebrew slaves, totally reject him. They reject him as their liberator, and they're kind of rejecting him as a Hebrew. Like, who are you to come talk to us, Mr. Dressed So Nice? Mr. Doesn't quite speak our language correctly. Is that an Egyptian accent that I hear? Yeah, that's right, because you are an Egyptian. You're not one of us. But, all of that kind of gets lost in Moses' mind, because he realizes, wait a minute, something worse has happened. Everybody knows. If these people know, it won't be long before Pharaoh knows, and he just runs. And he runs to Midian, which is the land of Midian. Midian, they're nomadic people, so the land of Midian is where the Midianites are, not necessarily a specific place like Egypt might be. You will note that throughout the history of Israel, the Midianites are sometimes enemies and sometimes not. This is a time when they are most certainly not. and they provide welcome and rescue to Moses, just to know that sometimes people who turn out to be enemies or have been enemies, they're not always like that. It's not a monolithic thing. It's also a good choice because Midian is a Semitic language. So the language of the Hebrews and the language of Midian are very similar. The way I would even imagine it is perhaps an Italian moving to Spain. There's enough similar words. Some of the words may even be the same word. The accent would be different, but it would be somewhat easy to begin to acculturate in that place. So he runs off to Midian, and he's hiding there, sitting by a well, when, in verse 16, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. So this is the 3rd time in just this story, in just this chapter, where Moses gets into a fight. This is peak action hero Moses. Makes for a great story, makes for a great film. There actually have been films that have been made about this because it's so dramatic. But it's also showing us something of his character in that he is kind of brash. He gets into fights, sometimes when he needs to and sometimes when he doesn't. He has an innate sense of justice. When he sees someone wronged, he wants to stop it. But he is not too worried about using force to stop that. He has been, and kind of is right now, a violent man. He's also a servant and willing to act when others are standing idly by. And in fact, so this is the first time that there's a fight and that the word for strike is not used. So it also appears that Moses is choosing not to engage at that level of force. And it's also, this is the first time where Moses acts out his name. Remember we learned from last week that Moses' name possibly misconjugated. It was meant to say, I drew him out, but it's the wrong word. And so it actually, he draws out. So this is the first time where we see Moses using his name as he's drawing out water. He draws out. It also shows that he realizes that the daughter's greatest need was not just to be stopped from being annoyed by these shepherds, but that they came to get their flock watered. And so, yes, he drives off the people who are annoying them, but then he says, but you came to water your flock, so I'm going to water your flock. And when they came home to their father Reuel, he said, how is it that you've come home so soon today? They said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and even drew water for us and watered the flock. And he said to his daughters, then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. This is the part of the story. I just love this part. This is, we have the same problem with our kids. Sometimes there'll be a knock at the door, and maybe we're cooking or we're doing something, washing dishes or something like that, and we say, could you get that? No problem. Could you get that? And then our sons will come back and say, it was so-and-so. Did you let them in? Did you say hello? No, you told me to see who it was. Which is true, but not exactly. We have to teach them that when their friends are leaving. They're like, okay, bye. No, go out to the door and say goodbye. Don't, just sit there reading. So what's happening is these daughters, they have done a faux pas. Maybe because of the the craziness of the situation. Maybe they it just like everyone is kind of flabbergasted by what's just happened. Maybe they say a quick thank you and then they run home. And this whole time, Ruel's like, okay, yeah. And then so this guy came and saved you, and like, wait a minute, you just left him at the well? Go get him. So they run back and they get him. They bring him to eat, and more than just eating dinner, he stays with Ruel. As a final kind of irony, remember at the beginning of the story, Moses went out to look and see what was happening to his people, but that was also an attempt for him to begin identifying as a Hebrew. And the very first action that he takes that is really in line with his name and his people and who God is calling him to be, he is mislabeled an Egyptian. Who saved you? An Egyptian man. He just showed up. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. So again, it doesn't say yet how long, but Moses is going to settle here for about 40 years. Like I said, everything that happens to Moses is 40 years. He starts a family, begins to live here, gets a new job. That job being a shepherd, which we already heard this directly from Scripture, that the Egyptians think that being a shepherd is an abomination. And even though we know that Moses is actually a Hebrew, culturally he is an Egyptian. So this is him taking what would be for him the lowest form of job that he could do. And he lives there for 40 years. And in this time, of this long time of quiet work in a job that must be the lowest form of job that he could think of, God is doing things in Moses, with Moses, to change him. One of the things that we hear from God, a pronouncement on Moses, is that he is patient. Nothing in the story that we have read so far has shown patience. He's kind of not cooked yet. Where the patience comes is these 40 years in the wilderness, being nothing. And I think, again, this sounds like a terrible thing, but the avenger, liberator that Moses wanted to be in the beginning, that was not the way that God wanted to remove the people of Israel. And that would have built them into a different kind of people. And God can't use that avenger. But that doesn't mean that he can't use Moses. He spends the time to work on Moses, build him into a different kind of person, and that Moses is going to go back to Pharaoh. And again, he's been living in Midian for 40 years. That means that if he spent 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in Midian, and I don't know, however long it takes to be weaned with his people, he has now spent 80 years as a not Hebrew, and maybe, let's say 2. We'll be generous and say 2 years where he was actually connected to Hebrew people. That means when he shows up, he's not going to dress like a Hebrew. He's not going to sound like a Hebrew. Maybe he speaks Hebrew but has an Egyptian Midian accent. And those kinds of things, you're going to see that insecurity in him. And despite all this, despite that he's sort of landed well, going from murder, now he has a wife and a child, the name that he gives to his child shows this longing to be connected to his people. Gershom means stranger there, literally. And I think it's really interesting to note, stranger there, not stranger here. It's not that he has been alienated in Midian. What he's really saying is, I was an alien in Egypt, stranger there. He lives the life of a sojourner alien. He's lived that life all of his days. Yes, when he was in Midian, but also he's realizing, I was an alien when I was in Egypt too. And he longs to be among the Hebrews and be identified with them, but nothing that he has done since and no ways that the people have engaged with him have given him any hope that that is going to happen. So now we're going to leave Moses. We're going to scene change, go somewhere else. It's okay. Moses will be there for 40 years, as he does. We're going to go to verse 23 here. For during those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. And again, this sort of reframes what has been happening in terms of the slavery. Josh kind of already let the cat out of the bag, but it appears that they were not crying out during the entirety of those 400 years. Something about the king dies, and then they began crying out. And again, the deliverer has already been born before they start praying. The deliverer is actually already a man now. And in one truth that seems shocking, Moses' rash murder may actually have slowed down what was happening. Maybe Moses doesn't murder, maybe doesn't run away. Maybe he engages with Pharaoh the right way, but he doesn't, so he has to leave. So the deliverer is here. He's already a man, but he is in exile right now. And I want to just engage with this idea that those 400 years, they were not crying out to God. I think there's several reasons why. One is, again, like we've been talking about, the people that we know as the Jewish people, a lot of the cultural ways that the knowledge of God was passed down don't really exist yet. There were times where they knew who their ancestors were. They knew that God had interacted with their ancestors, but the knowledge of God was not necessarily given to each person individually. And so it's possible that they just didn't really know what to do or how to engage with this God. There's also a possibility that there's something about the death of Pharaoh that triggers this. Maybe they were hoping for a regime change, that things would change, or that, you know what, they're being really jerks right now, but as soon as they forget about that, then we'll be fine now. And something about that moment where the regime change happens and it just doesn't get better, and then they realize we got to have another power we need. And then one issue that, from language perspective, it says that God remembered his covenant. But that word actually doesn't mean to recall as if forgotten. in the context of covenants, to remember a covenant means that to choose to act on the stipulations. So when it says that God remembered his covenant, it wasn't that he forgot. It was that he said, now I'm acting to make that covenant rule fact. And I think there's several takeaways for this reflection on Moses in kind of three parts. And the first is just how unsuitable at this time he is to be the person that God needs for the deliverance. He has his sense of justice right, but he is also full of violence, too willing to take matters of life and death into his own hands. Moses' murder is kind of liberation on his terms, in the power of Moses, in a way that he understands best, with vengeance. Even the way that Stephen says, he avenged him. His picture of liberation was being an avenger. As humans, we cannot be trusted with vengeance. It is too easy for us to take more than we should. It's too easy for us to craft a story around what is happening and paint ourselves as the perfect victim with no culpability. But if there must be vengeance, we need to leave that to God himself. He is the one who can carry it out properly. And I think this is applicable in the time of Moses, but I think it is becoming even more applicable now when we say, this is what they have done. We are the perfect victims, and we must now take vengeance. Humans cannot be trusted with vengeance. As the temperature rises in our culture, as we even see real oppression happening, we cannot choose to be an avenger. We need to leave judgment in the hands of God, who is able to judge, who is able to avenge, but also able to heal. And then there's this idea that we have to stop this. This is so bad that the only way we can stop this is killing. And I think that this story shows that murder is unacceptable cost for liberation of the Hebrew people. And I know, as we're coming up, we're going to get to the plagues, and some people will die in the plagues, but it is not murder. In fact, the people are told exactly what to do to escape the death. And those that have died are the ones that choose not to follow the instructions. God's judgment is not the same as murder, and that's why Moses' act doesn't lead to the kind of liberation that the people need. So if we look and we see the need for liberation, the need for oppression to stop, and we think that the only way to do that is killing, then I know that sometimes God asks us to do crazy things, but he doesn't ask us to do things that are not in line with his character and what he's already spoken about. You shall not murder is always in operation. God calls us to do crazy things, and the crazy things that he calls us are not things that are opposite to what he said in Scripture. They're usually things that just don't make sense, like throw your staff down. You need to show your power, throw your staff down. Strike the Nile. What is that going to do? You know? This person, you need to give them a melon. So give them a melon. Those are the kinds of crazy things that God asks us to do that don't make sense, not things against what he has stated already as his law. Another aspect of our meditation is this palpable longing that Moses has to be known as a Hebrew. It's so clear in this passage that one of his goals was to be a part of his people. And he is rebuffed, he is pushed aside, He is misidentified as an Egyptian. He is acculturated to Midian now as well as Egypt. The only place where he's not really acculturated is his own people. And yet, even with those insecurities, God weaves Moses a story that is so essential to the identity of Hebrews that it will not be possible to think about what it means to be Jewish without thinking of Moses. In fact, so impossible that it becomes a problem by the time Jesus shows around. And even what Stephen is saying when he's talking about, you guys don't really know who Moses was. It's really, they're like, well, we love Moses. Moses is great. Moses is awesome. He is the best person of our people. And Stephen was actually saying, nope, you didn't like Moses either. You rejected him too. There is this story that God weaves for Moses makes it impossible for him to be anything but who he has longed to be. And I wish I could tell Moses that now, while he's sitting alone, naming his son, stranger there, that hang on there, buddy. It's coming. You are going to be welcomed. And I know that there's some people here that have that same longing to be welcomed someplace. And I cannot promise you that the story will be the exact same as Moses, where it's a complete reversal and he's totally accepted by his people. But I can promise you that when you come to God in your fractioned and fractured senses, that you will be accepted. And that in part the church has been crafted as a place, even when they fail, the church has been crafted as a place where you would be welcome too. So if you have that longing to be a part of the people here, know that you are meant to be a part of the people. And finally, I think I cannot get over the missed opportunity that is the Hebrews' late start to praying. We don't know exactly when they started praying. It's just sometime in that period, likely, in my opinion, based on the way the scripture is written, after the death of this Pharaoh. But it is something that we fall prey to on modern times as well. After all, we don't need to wait and see how things turn out. Maybe it's just going to take care of itself. Maybe if we just get this law passed, if we could just get this person elected, we wouldn't need God. I think that's the reason why we're not praying. But hear me this, even if that person gets elected, even if that law gets enacted, you're going to need God. We don't need to wait around and see how it all susses out. We're still going to need God in the future. We're going to need God now. We're going to need God whether he or she gets elected or not. We're going to need God if that situation gets worse. And we're going to need God if the situation appears to be getting better and better and better. We're going to need God. And so this is really our call to prayer, that we don't look around at the circumstances and ask ourselves, should we bring God into this moment? But we are called to pray for our rescue daily, knowing that our circumstances can change, it can get better, it can get worse, but God always hears, sees, knows, and remembers his promise. Let's pray. God, we thank you that you were not willing for the kind of person that Moses was in the beginning to be the kind of rescue that you were going to bring for your people. We thank you for that. We ask that we would be the kind of people that could be molded and shaped into being that kind of person. God, we pray now, too, for rescue. Whether things are getting worse or better. We know that wherever we are, wherever we are going, we need you there. So God, we throw ourselves on your mercy and your strength to save us. In Jesus' name, amen.